On September 17th, 1920, a group of football teams get together and form a league, naming it the American Professional Football Association, focusing mainly with teams in the Midwest and Northeast, with 11 founding members, and American sports icon Jim Thorpe elected president. This was the beginning of what would become what we now know as the NFL. Today we're going to dive into the history of how the NFL started with this one league back in the 1920s, over 100 years ago, on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, and I'm going to help guide you as you learn and relive sports history to daily grow your sports knowledge. And today's trivia question is, what two original teams that played in the 1920 American Professional Football Association are still in the NFL today? Now, professional football actually goes back to when Pudge Heflinger and Ben Sports Donnelly each received money to play for different football teams, making them the first professional football athletes. A new concept at the time. And over the years, as football continued to grow in popularity, so did the possibility of a football league outside of college. Because at this point, in the early 1900s, college was the mainstay for football. Everyone that was anything in football was a college player. And after that, many of them went to go live regular lives or become Olympians or try for other different sports. And some sports leagues did pop up. In 1902, there was a New York-based World Series of Pro Football tournament that disbanded after a couple years. They didn't get the interest they wanted, as college football was the key at the time. Then there was an Ohio league that popped up, and they were able to get athletes such as Jim Thorpe to try out. But again, it would fizzle out, especially during World War I, when a lot of these players that would be playing in these leagues went to war. But after World War II is when football really started to grow at the professional level. And then in August of 1920, at a car dealership in Canton, Ohio, the league was formed, known as the American Professional Football Conference, and initially just consisted of teams in Ohio. So there's the Akron Pros, the Columbus Panhandlers, the Dayton Triangles, and the Toledo Maroons. But less than a month later, they held another conference on September 17th, and renamed it the American Professional Football Association. And they added some other teams from New York, such as Buffalo and Rochester, and even Detroit and Hammond, Indiana, which is just a suburb of Chicago. So that first season, they had the Akron Pros, the Buffalo All-Americans, the Canton Bulldogs, the Chicago Cardinals, the Chicago Tigers, the Cleveland Tigers, the Columbus Panhandlers, the Dayton Triangles, the Decatur Stanleys, the Detroit Heralds, the Hammond Pros, the Muncie Flyers, the Rochester Jeffersons, and the Rock Island Independents, for a total of 14 teams that would end up playing. But a lot of these teams moved and transformed into other teams throughout the years. So at this meeting, they introduced a salary cap for teams to keep teams with richer owners from paying more than smaller teams. And they could not sign college players. They had to be a graduate or not in college at all. And they could not sign players under contract with another team. And their idea was college football was so popular at the time that these players needed a place to go after college to show their skill to get even better. Because as we know now, your prime in your athletic career is in your late 20s, early 30s, not when you're 22 or 18. So you get better play the more you do it. And so after all the teams were conducted, they actually elected Jim Thorpe as the president of the league, pretty much the commissioner today, although Jim Thorpe actually coached the Canton Bulldogs as well. But at the time, they didn't worry about conflict of interest, and each team created their own dynamic schedule, meaning there was no minimum or maximum games they needed to play. And at the end of the year, each team would vote to determine the winner of the league instead of having a playoff or a championship game. So that first season in 1920 was rocky. But on September 26th was when the very first game was held, where the Rock Island Independents beat the St. Paul Idols 48-0. Now, this was just the first game featuring one of the teams. As you notice, the St. Paul Idols were not in the APFA. Now, the first official game featuring two teams happened on October 3rd, where the Dayton Triangles, who will beat you with their geometry, beat the Columbus Panhandlers, who were begging for some points, 14-0. Yes, I'm making fun of these names as they are hilarious to think about today. I'm just imagining the fans in the stands would be very different than what we have in Raider Nation or with the Packers Cheeseheads, which is already a little bit ridiculous. But that was just the first game. There were 6 other games featuring APFA teams that same day. Now, some of these were playing other teams in the league. Some of these were playing other teams we've never heard of. And that's really what it was. It was more of a collective than a league. You didn't have to play a restricted schedule. It was a lot like college, where, a college team can play whoever they want. It's kind of what it was like. A lot of these teams played other teams in their local area or nearby because they didn't really want to travel too far, as a lot of these people were factory workers, miners, all these blue-collar jobs they had outside of this because they were not getting paid very much. And they would play out the year all the way through December, playing a total of 13 weeks. And by the time the league was done, by the time the year was over, the team at the top of the standings was the Akron Pros, who went 8-0-3 and beat 6 opponents in the American Professional Football Association. And because of this, the Akron Pros were voted the championships of the leagues and given the Brunswick Bulk Colander Cup, which was a silver trophy that was sponsored by the Bulkwin Bulk Colander Company, which is still in existence today, is now known as the Burswick Company, and is an S&P Top 400 company. Now, it was some controversy, as the Dakota Stanleys, who went 10-1-2, and the Buffalo All-Americans, who went 9-1-1, had more wins, so they should have been the winners. But they could not make the change. And instead of each player getting rings, they actually got a little fob, a little keychain type thing, a golden keychain that said 1920 World Champ, with their first initial and their last name on it. And what's interesting is Akron actually had a non-modern perfect season, as they did have ties, but they didn't lose a game. And this has only happened 4 other times in NFL history, with the 1922 and 23 Canton Bulldogs, the 1929 Green Bay Packers, and the 1972 Miami Dolphins. And since then, there have been 10 players that played in the original 1920 season that have been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, of that first season, only 2 teams remain in the NFL today, and that's the Decatur Stanleys, who moved around and became the Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Cardinals, who are now the Arizona Cardinals. Now, in June 1922, the APFA changed its name to the National Football League and continued to grow as teams continued to change throughout the years. Some teams left, new teams were added, and it seemed like every year they got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger into what we know today as the National Football League, one of the most profitable sports league in the world, and what we love every Sunday to watch. Thank you for listening to today's Daily Sports History. If you like this, please make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss a single episode. You can come back tomorrow for more Daily Sports History. And the answer to today's trivia question: what 2 original teams that played in the 1920 American Professional Football Association are still in the NFL today? The Decatur Stanleys, which became the Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Cardinals, who became the Arizona Cardinals.